Well, good evening, everyone. I ended up being a little bit behind schedule here, so I didn't have a chance to test the camera angle and all that. Hopefully, everyone can see me okay. And if you hear some kind of weird noise in the background, it's because it's windy as crazy here. And we had a beautiful day today. It was in the 60s and it was sunny. And wow, welcome, everyone. I see people popping on, and happy Sunday evening to you. My name is Janice Kortkamp, and I'm trying to get my setup working here. I think it's working. Can everyone see me okay and hear? It looks like I'm not seeing any problems. So tonight I'm very excited because we're going to lay aside some of the hard and heavy politics and news and all of that, and focus on Syria as a country and what it's like to travel around there and some of the experiences that I've had. This is in an effort to try to normalize Syria and the Syrian people. Hi, Mary. Hi, everyone. To normalize Syria for people in the U.S. and in the Western world who have been seeing what can only be called very limited viewpoint of the country, as well as the war. So we're going to talk about Syria as a country and the people there, and I'll do that by sharing some stories. I want to dedicate this episode to President Donald Trump and Fox News' Tucker Carlson. President Trump described Syria recently as being only sand and blood. Tucker Carlson, who, actually asks a lot of the right questions, and he's done some fairly good reports, surprisingly, about Syria and questioning these regime change wars and the war in Syria, etc. But he described Syria as the worst country in the world recently. So while I support President Trump's announcement of a pullout that obviously apparently is not going to happen, which I don't support, we should get out of Syria. And I do support Tucker Carlson at least asking some of the right questions about Syria. This episode is dedicated to you two to show you that Syria is not only blood and sand and is not in any way, shape, or form the worst country in the world. It's my favorite place to be other than here on the farm. I go to Syria to spend time, literally to just relax and spend time absorbing the country, absorbing the culture, absorbing, the realities on the ground there, and to spend time with people. And I spend hours and hours and hours with as many people as I possibly can. And this is what has been such a mind-blowing, life-changing experience for me. I absolutely adore the people over there. And hopefully with more information like this, people who don't know anything about Syria will come to appreciate the country as well. Tonight's stories, I'm going to focus primarily on Damascus, Maaloula, and Homs. I realized as I was putting this together that, there are just so many stories and so much I would like to share. So we'll do probably part 2 and 3 as we go along in this series. So this episode in particular, will be dealing with Damascus, Maaloula, and Homs. But first I want to talk a little bit about getting into the country, because many people ask me, they say, oh, I'd love to go to Syria. I want to get in there. And I'm a little disorganized, I'm sorry. And it's very difficult. I'll just be honest with you, for people from America particularly, but also from some Western countries, it is still very difficult, almost impossible to get a visa. I go in under primarily journalist visas. I have contacts in Damascus, and they have assisted me processing my paperwork through the various government departments there that are involved, and I really appreciate their assistance. And and it's tough for me. I mean, I put in my paperwork and I wait and wait and wait and wait and hope and hope and hope. And I'm always thrilled to hear that, yes, I'll be getting a visa. So I just encourage people to really stay patient. I believe that this is all going to change very soon. Hopefully this year, if not this year, I'm sure next year that visas will be easier to get. I heard recently that visas are much easier to get for people in Norway. I think there is a Syrian embassy operating in Norway. Correct me if I'm wrong, friends in Norway, but that is very exciting to me, and I hope that that's the case, and I hope that's the first case of many where it'll get easier. But typically, when people like me, journalists, independent journalists, go into Syria, we fly into Beirut in Lebanon. I typically stay there at least a night or a couple of nights, and then you arrange for a car and a driver to take you over the border of Lebanon and into Syria. And these guys are, I always work through the hotel that I stay in Beirut to get great drivers. Typically, though, they do not speak English. They either speak only Arabic or Arabic and French, and my French is as bad as my Arabic. So I always work with the hotel guys who do speak English, and we meet with the driver, and I make sure that the driver has all the names of my friends in Damascus that, can help if any problem occurs. You get in the car and you drive, gosh, what is it, an hour or so or more to the border to Syria, excuse me. And you go through all the paperwork there. Sometimes there are problems and you have to, the paperwork's not there, there's a question or what have you, and you work that out at the border. The people there have always been super professional, very gracious and kind to me, and wanting to work out these issues if any should come up. But in any event, finally you get across, you leave Lebanon, you get your visa to go into Syria, and you drive through the border checkpoints. And there are several army checkpoints immediately after you cross the border. So Syria's at war, of course, and in a war for its survival. And yet when I've hit those checkpoints, and by that time I'm happy and I'm smiling, everything's gone great, I'm back home, I'm back to my beloved second home, Syria, and there's always a big smile on my face. And, the soldiers will smile back and say, "You're most welcome in Syria." One time I had a group come, I have organized several groups also of truth seekers to go into Syria with me. One time we were coming in, and the soldiers at the checkpoint gave us this huge basket of beautiful fresh apples, which was a most welcome treat. And it might strike some people as funny that when I crossed the border into Syria, I just breathed this huge sigh of kind of peace. And it's very hard to explain that to people, because you're actually going from beautiful Beirut, I love Lebanon, into Syria, which has been at war, of course, for many years. But there's just this feeling of, really, it can only be described as happiness of going back. And, it's just, I hope everyone truly who has come to appreciate and love Syria will go and get that chance to go. I just cannot emphasize that enough. So anyway, you drive over the border, and you're kind of in a set of mountains, and you drive down to across a plain, and then you go over a set of hills, and you come up over the hill, and before you lies Damascus. And it's like, yay! By that time, the Arabic music's playing on the radio, and you just can't wait to get to this city. And I always stay in the old city in beautiful hotels like I've described before. My home away from home in Damascus is a hotel called Beit al-Wali. And Beit al-Wali really has been like a family to me. The people who are there, the staff. It is a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous hotel. It was a 5-star hotel before the war, and they've maintained that standard of service. I mean, it's the kind of place that I can afford to stay in just because of the sad exchange rate, really, that is so difficult on Syrians, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But for those of us who travel there, it's really made travel doable for those of us that have been on a severe budget. But I do splurge a little bit in Damascus because honestly, it's not that much more than a normal. It's actually been less money than the kind of modern hotels that were considered safe for foreigners, because old Damascus throughout much of the war was quite dangerous. Anyway, so you pull up to Beit al-Wali, and they greet you with this little cocktail, a fruit cocktail, not an alcoholic drink, but fresh squeezed orange juice and pomegranate juice, etc. And it's like they just take care of you. They just wrap you in their arms with this quality of professional service that is also just so friendly and warm. And it's a magnificent combination. And so that's where I stay in Damascus. But I wanted to share some stories of just being in Damascus and enjoying the city there. And like I said, we're laying aside the bad stuff. I've been there many times when mortars were falling all around from terrorist groups that were nearby, etc. Now it's very safe in Damascus. No one need worry. But I'm not dealing with that tonight. I want to talk about what it's like to be a tourist in Damascus. And it's one of the most fabulous cities on the planet. I think it was, the British show Top Gear, the famous show about cars, went to the Middle East, and they drove around 5 countries there. Syria was obviously their favorite. And they went to Damascus. This was right before the war, so I think it was about 2009. And they said Damascus goes straight to the list of top 5 cities of all time. And it is magnificent, spectacular city. So when you're in Damascus, of course, the main area for the touristas, and for a lot of Syrians as well, is the old city. And this is the ancient core of the oldest continuously inhabited capital city in the world. And it consists of, there are some very nice, there are some streets. In fact, the street called Straight that's famous in the Bible is there, and my hotel is pretty close by. But most of it consists of these these pretty narrow cobblestone alleyways. And it's like something out of a movie set, but it's all real. And you can wander around those alleyways, and there's just something around every corner, some kind of eye candy that you continuously see around every corner. And some fabulous shops there, great cafes, art galleries. There's a nice park there, and craftsman workshops and antique stores and things like that. So I spent a lot of time in Damascus just literally wandering around, and often I'm just by myself, and I just like kind of heading out, and sometimes I deliberately try to get lost, because it's the best place in the world, in my opinion, to get lost. There's always nice people to help you if you need to head back to the hotel and don't know how to get there. But it's just really fun to just wander around and see what happens and what comes before you. I was in old Damascus, and I was on a street of a lot of shops one day, and I was just kind of going shop to shop, and I just window shop. For the most part, I maybe buy one little thing each trip as a memento, as a gift for people. Mostly do window shopping, you know. But as you're going to these shops, literally, you know, for the most part, you're asked in and given tea or coffee, and people want to spend time with you. Gosh, there's so many people joining. I really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. So I just intended to go shop to shop to shop that day. And by the end of the day, I was so buzzed on caffeine, I could hardly stand up. Because at every stop, you know, I was doing little cups of tea and coffee. And I went into one of the shops, a beautiful antique shop, and the owner, who speaks English fairly well, said, "Where are you from?" Because they often assume that I'm from Russia. And I said, I always say, you know, I'm from America, a little sheepishly. And I might have told this story before, but he was like, oh, if I had known that an American was coming, I would have taken a red carpet and rolled it out over the sidewalk to welcome you. And I was like, wow, why? You know, after everything that's happened here, after everything my government has been involved with here. And he was just like, oh, you know, we know Americans are not the same as your government. And, you know, but we love Americans. And this is, again, the attitude I've encountered from almost everyone there. There are people that are angry at Americans now because of the war. But I would say, you know, just the huge, vast majority of people there really love Americans as people. In another shop, I was on a bit of a quest because I wanted to see some real Damascus steel. This kind of goes into a little bit of the history of Syria. It's very famous for certain things. Damascus steel, there's some talk that it started in India. I don't believe it. I think it's a Syrian invention, but it's a lost art. And it has to do with folding steel, I don't even know the number of times, hundreds of times, to create a very intricate blade that can be very sharp, but is also has a little bit of flexibility. It's not brittle, etc. It's a famous thing that you'll see people trying to copy now, and they'll call them Damascus steel knives and Damascus steel swords, but there is no such thing as Damascus steel now. It hasn't been produced, I think, since the 1700s. And so I was on a quest to find Damascus steel, and I went into a shop of a guy that I have met a couple of times. He's a great guy, and he was basically born and raised in that shop. It was his father's shop and his grandfather's shop. Fabulous shop of the most exquisite pieces of art and antiques and vintage items and things, jewelry. And I go there as often as I can. Sometimes he has health issues, but whenever I can, I try to get some time with him because he has the most fabulous stories. I think there have been 40 world leaders that have been to that shop. Jimmy Carter, I think, had been there, and you know, all kinds of folks over the decades. And I figured if anybody could get me a glimpse of real Damascus steel, it would be this man. And so I asked him, and he was like, okay, come with me, you know. And he led me out of his shop down a little alley to a very humble looking kiosk, another little shop, but there was no markings on the shop. There was a heavy wooden door. He unlocks the heavy wooden door, opens that up, and then there's a metal door that gets opened up, and then a glass door that gets opened up, and we go into kind of the the even more special gallery where some really priceless things are. And there's a whole display case on the wall of true antique Damascus steel swords and knives, and that was really exciting for me that my quest was successful. Wandering around old Damascus, you invariably end up in the Al-Hamadiyya Souk, and anybody who's gone to Damascus has visited the souk, I'm sure. I hope nobody has ever traveled there and not gone to the famous souk, which is the famous covered market. Ancient market. I mean, it's been there hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years as a marketplace. And you hear the word marketplace, think it's actually almost a small city within the old city, which is in the big city of Damascus. This thing has literally these big, kind of fairly big streets, and then lots of narrow alleys and little streets cutting off of that. And you can just wander around there, and everything, you can get everything there, from herbs and spices and traditionally made soaps like this one that I'll talk about more when talking about Aleppo, to women's lingerie, the stuff that you would see practically in Victoria's Secret shops, perfumes, textiles, furniture, clothing. There's butcher shops in there. Each row kind of has its own speciality, candies, sweets, and it's just little street after street after street of all these fabulous goods and cheap goods and expensive goods. And I went there one time, and this was actually my first trip, and I had wanted to buy a tablecloth, and I wanted something, from the shops there. And Syria is famous for its textiles. Of course, everyone, I think, has heard of damask silk. That is silk that is woven in Syria and has a very intricate, beautiful brocade design. And this silk is so famous that that's what Queen Elizabeth asked for her wedding gown to be made out of, and they sent buyers to Damascus to buy the silk for her wedding gown so many years ago. And they're also famous for their cottons, so silks and cottons especially. And so I wanted kind of a humble little, multicolored tablecloth. And I walked into a nice shop, and this guy was like, "Oh, you need this silk one, and it's white." I should have grabbed it. White with gold-colored thread on it. And I said, "Oh, that's beautiful, but my family and a white tablecloth, a white silk tablecloth, forget it. It would last a day, and then it would be trashed." And he said, no, you don't understand. You could throw this tablecloth into your washing machine every day for 20, 30 years, and you would still be using it. I said, if I can put a silk tablecloth in my washing machine, you've got a deal. And he gave me a very nice, very good price on it, and I treasure it. Pull it out for all the special meals of Thanksgivings and Christmas dinners. Also in the old souk is the famous Bakdash, I hope I said that right, ice cream. This is Arabic ice cream, and there are these huge tubs that are in ice, and they actually use these huge pounding mallets to, instead of a hand crank churn, like the old-fashioned way of doing it here. And so these guys are just like pounding the cream and the sugar, etc., and makes this custardy ambrosia ice cream. Oftentimes you can get with pistachios or not. That is really world famous. Anyone who knows Damascus knows about this ice cream parlor. The lines are always way out the door, which is frustrating. I finally decided to wait in line, and it took me like 45 minutes to get my ice cream, and it was worth it. So that's another thing to put on your bucket list for Syria. All over Damascus, and especially in the old city, are craftsman workshops. This is another famous craft of Syria, and these are wood inlay boxes. And there are many different kinds of wood in these intricate designs, and the white that you see is actually shell. And they do these, they're chess boards and backgammon boards. I did get one clock that I have to do the clockwork again on. But absolutely gorgeous, and everybody gets these to give as Christmas presents and stuff for their loved ones. Beautiful, gorgeous designs. Inside is, these are all lined, and you can see this is solid wood, not a veneer, etc. And in my little box, I have this, which is not very fancy, but this is perfume. This is Damascus rose perfume, which is another thing. Oh, I wish you could smell it. It's another thing that Syria is very famous for, is the oil of the Damascus rose. The Damascus rose is really the key ingredient in almost every designer floral perfume in the world today. And in fact, the Romans were so impressed with the fragrance of the Damascus rose. They're actually the ones, I think, that took it up into Europe and into France, and the rest is history, as we say. So Syria is very famous for its crafts, like I said, textiles, woodworking, metalworking, perfumes, etc. And it's just fascinating to be able to walk around the streets and see these men working on these crafts that they learned from their fathers and their father's father, etc. How are we doing? Oh, I see. Hello, Rami. Greetings from Damascus, from Babtuma, the old city. That's my neighborhood, Rami. Thank you for joining us. One of the things that is also a must-see, of course, in Damascus, one of the things that people don't get about Syria, two things. It's in the Middle East. It's the heart of the Middle East. It's the ancient civilization. The world's first language was discovered there. The world's oldest continuously populated cities are there. We're talking history that goes back thousands of years, BC. There's just so much history that's occurred there. And this is why Andre Parrot of the Louvre Museum, famous French archaeologist, said that every civilized person has two homelands, his own and Syria. It's a famous quote that we all think about often, because it does feel like that. It feels like you're returning kind of to home when you're there. One of the classic stops for tourists is the Umayyad Mosque. I want to backtrack a little bit about what most people don't get about Syria. What most people don't get about Syria is that it's a secular country. It's mostly Muslim. They're about 85 or 90% Muslims of all the Islamic sects. So you have Sunnis and Alawites and traditional Shiites and Druze, etc. You also have many Christians there. They were about 10% Christian before the war. That might have been cut in half over the course of the war, sadly. You have pagans there. A lot of people are atheists there. So I've met a Buddhist there. And so you have, this wonderful diversity of religious expression. And it's very common, your best friend who might be a Sunni, other best friend might be an Alawite, another best friend Christian, might go visit a mosque together, might go visit a church together, might go visit a bar or an art gallery, what have you. I've tried to describe this before, but there is a really an exemplary level of mutual respect between the religious groups. This has been under attack because of the war, but the core of it still exists there. And this is what the Syrian people want in their country. The great majority of Syrians want their country to be this way, respectful and harmony between the religions. So anyway, another stop on the tour of old Damascus is the Umayyad Mosque. And I had actually never been in a mosque before. I have many Muslim friends here in America, but I had just actually never gotten to a mosque before. And this one is a great one to start with because it's, this beautiful, spectacular, ancient mosque. It was converted from a church. The church, it was a pagan temple, and then it was a church, and now it's a mosque. Actually, there is a tomb that is reported to contain the head of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is a highly revered figure, as is Jesus and Mary, etc., in Syria. Many streets, even villages, are named for John the Baptist and Mary, etc. So when you go to visit the mosque, again, as I've said before, I dress like this in Syria. There's never any requirement for me to cover my hair, etc., except when you go into a mosque, obviously. But, like I've said before, girls wear shorts and jeans and mini dresses and everything else there, or you can wear a burqa. It is up to you. And so I typically wear jeans and t-shirt, so I when you go up to the mosque, very friendly folks. You just go into this little room and they hand you a robe and you put that on and take your shoes off and you go into this gorgeous, spectacular, beautiful edifice, this building with a huge courtyard and fabulous mosaics and stonework and a very peaceful place. And, you can go in to the inside and, just be among the people there and see the tomb of John the Baptist, etc. And, I wish I could take Americans that are just so freaked out. They don't understand about, they've been kind of programmed to distrust all Muslims. And they don't understand about the spectrum and diversity. I've met Muslims that are diehard atheists and Muslims that are very devout and faithful. And I have met, I know, Muslims who are extremists and fanatics and support terrorists. So there's this whole spectrum there. But, it's really important for people here in America to understand that it is, of course, mostly Muslims who are dying from terrorists. And it is mostly Muslims who are fighting terrorists in the Middle East. And I just hope that someday, somehow, to get people to understand this idea of spectrum and the reality of who's really suffering from these wars. They're just amazing, great people there. In fact, I was going back to the one shopkeeper that said I would roll out a red carpet for you. I was talking to one friend in Syria, and he said, in school, I was taught that the people of a country are not their government. To always have that separate in my mind. that there's what the human beings do of a country, and there's what the government does of a country. And this is one of the reasons why people from America and Britain and Europe and Australia, even though our countries have been involved in all these terrible sanctions and supporting terrorists and all kinds of horrible things there, that the people of Syria do not hold us personally responsible for that. And I think that's wisdom, and I appreciate them teaching that to me. I think, oh wow, it's really going on in time. I'm going to fast forward to visiting Homs, and I'll have to do my Lula on another night. I'm sorry, I kind of went on and on about Damascus there, and I could go on for another several episodes, I think, on Damascus. But I wanted to talk about Homs, which is really in the center of the country, on the populated side of the country. So half of Syria on the west side is verdant, it's green. There are a lot of the agriculture is done there. The biggest cities are there. And then half is a desert steppe where there are fewer large cities and lesser population, etc. So on that eastern half, that's the most densely populated areas, Homs is really in the center, and it's the hub. So all the roads kind of lead through Homs to get anywhere. And as I've said before, I love it there. But on my first day of visiting, on the way to Homs, I was actually coming from Latakia that first trip, and I got to stay in a village for a night before heading to Homs City. And so you're kind of driving through these hills from Latakia, beautiful, gorgeous scenery. I mean, spectacular. Wildflowers and orchards and olive groves and everything, little villages, one after another. And we got to my friend's village, and he said, I have to apologize that my family's house is very simple. It's decorated with flowers and books. That's pretty much a description of a heavenly home for me. And, the family who has really gone through a lot during the war and very, not bringing in much money, etc. Things are really tough for them. And still they put out a beautiful dinner, and their daughter had made a beautiful pink cake or a cake. I don't think it was pink, but a cake to enjoy. We went to this gorgeous area that's all these old oak trees. And so it's just this big orchard of beautiful, mature oak trees. And just to kind of walk around outside in the countryside. And we had brought a picnic, a tea picnic. So we set up our little cooking stove and made the water and had tea there. It was just a really magical time to be able to spend in the village. And in the evening, we were on the balcony. Everybody has balconies. All the balconies are covered with grapevines, to act as shade in the summer. And there are flowers everywhere, flowers in pots and everywhere. And we're looking over from the hill where the village is down to the plain below. And my friend is just pointing out one village. Okay, that one's Al-Qaeda. That village over there is ISIS. That one is, not taken over by terrorists. And he's just kind of picking out, showing me these villages. But he said, this one over here is ISIS, this very close one. But because of the topography, they couldn't launch any missiles or anything into the village. So that was wonderful. I'm actually totally running out of time here, and I'm gonna ask Sid to come in, and we'll kind of finish it up. I'll do Homs and Malula and Aleppo and Palmyra and Deir ez-Zor on future episodes. I'm glad we got to go into a little bit of depth about Damascus. But I want you to think back as Sid joins us here about what I said in the beginning about going to spend time there. And as Sid is talking, I'm going to look through comments and see if there are any specific questions.
Well, hello. All I've heard so far is Jan say spend time there. And first off, tonight we're featuring bread. But I want to talk about that thing, time. When Jan goes to Syria, she spends a month. And why is the screen frozen?
I'll get it fixed. You just keep working. Okay. Everybody's okay.
Hello. And we are born American. We are raised American. You live your life. If you're blessed, you get your 1 week vacation and you have to make things happen during that week. And then you come home. And if you've only got a week, you can't let things happen. And so she travels for a month. Well, it takes forever to get there. And it takes a while. Everything takes a while. Dan, at one point, Dan Rather,
you said Walter Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite took a sailboat across the Mediterranean. And the book that he wrote was Racing Through Paradise. They crossed the Med in 14 days. They had a wine list of 150 different wines. They didn't have time to breathe. They had so much stuff scheduled, much less drink their wine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about bread today. Now, very sad in many ways. Bread is not part of our culture because you buy it in a store. It comes in a package, it's pre-sliced, and you put a slice here and you put a slice there and you put your mayonnaise, or if you're a mustard person, your mustard, and you make your sandwich, or there you have it.
That's all the people saying they love you, honey.
Throughout the world, they're so proud of their breads.
Yes.
And the stories, early stories we'd hear of people who used to work in Syria, repeatedly, the highlight of the day was our 5-year-old daughter would go out of the apartment, go 3 blocks or 4 blocks by herself and pick up the bread for the day and bring it back to the apartment. Well, there were 1,000 loving eyes tracing that little child and the joy of getting that bread. Now, what I have today is a piece of flatbread. Now, we have a very good friend who came from Pakistan. And when we really got introduced to flatbread was after his wife came over. Our boys were young, and she would make the bread and she would flatten it. And she would make it for the boys, I mean, over and over and over. And it's like, do you all want it with butter? Yes, we want it with butter. Butter inside, Ruby. And she'd, right at the end, she'd work butter into flat, and it always come off hot. So our boys got some exposure to some good bread. When I was a kid, I lived in the Florida Keys. We'd drive to Key West. A loaf of Cuban bread, 11 cents. About that long, but bullet small. And we'd buy 10 loaves. And seldom did they make it back an hour north. Because we'd eat one, and then we'd eat the next one, then we'd eat the next one, and my dad would be like, hey, this is for the whole week. It's like, no, this was our daily bread today, Pop. Thank you very much. In letting things happen, she comes back from her trips, and I'll get a story. I'll get a highlight. I'll get things that happened. And she shared with me a stop on the side of the road, which probably, if she were going to put it, was the best meal she ever had in her life. And what I have here is a far, far cry from what she got. Because number one, these are frozen flat loaves. So, yes, it's fast food. It's processed food. But for us, it's quite good because it's quite authentic. This is a product of India. You have India, Pakistan. You know, everybody's proud of their breads. We don't put anybody down for anything. But bread with butter and honey.
It's going to take a minute.
Is what this story that Jan's about to tell is about.
Wow.
Tell your story.
Thank you, honey. What a beautiful introduction. And that looks really good, actually. I'm going to end tonight with a story from a village called Slunfa. It's in the hills outside of Latakia. Absolutely gorgeous spot. Latakia is on the Mediterranean, of course. And the hills above the sea are often misty, you know, and very green and beautiful. How is it, honey?
Best bread I've had today.
And so my friend said, we got to go to Slunfa and see it. And I want us to have a meal there, a picnic. So we drove up into the hills, and there's this little place on the side of the road. It's a bakery run by people. Now, when I say bakery, there's no walls or anything. There's like a covering, and there's one of the old style clay bread ovens, and the family there, you know, making the dough and everything, and just putting out these beautiful little, you know, they call them pies or whatever, pizza. They look like little pizzas, and they were covered with za'atar, which is a wild thyme spice mix that I love that we'll talk about some other night, or red pepper paste, you know, all different little toppings. But my friend said you've got to save room for the last one, which will be the bread and the honey butter. And I'm like, okay, you know, I've had some good honeys in my life. I'll be honest with you. We have wonderful local honey here, you know, from small farmers, beekeepers, etc. But the last ones came out with this honey on it. And I mean, I have never tasted anything as exquisite as that flavor of that honey. And like I said, I've had these amazing honeys, but this one is like, you know, just in a class by itself. And if I'm understanding the process correctly, the beekeepers will move their hives as different wildflowers and blossoms bloom, and they move them around as they have done forever. And they just make,
at least as long as there's been bees.
And they make this stuff that really, if there's a food that could be called nectar of the gods, it would be this honey that I have in Slunfa. And I hope that I'm not building it up too much or exaggerating. I don't think I am. For me, it was really one of the most memorable meals that I think that I will ever have in my life.
And that is a classic. You can't make that happen.
Mm.
You have to let that happen. That's not going to happen on a 1-week trip anywhere. You go and you spend time. spend time.
So,
And
go ahead.
just people are wonderful everywhere.
Yeah.
Governments are crazy everywhere.
Mm.
So you miss the government, you love the people, and life is good.
Mm. And we like spending this time with you. And going back to how I introduced it to President Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson, I hope someday that you will actually go to Syria, maybe even go to Slunfa, and have some bread and honey and realize that you don't know Syria. Americans do not know Syria. The NBC and ABC and CNN and Fox News, they don't know what it's like in Syria. So when you're listening to all these stories about the war and how awful President Assad is, when the vast majority of people there support him and his wife for good reason, if you hear about, how brutal the Syrian army is, understand that that's not the way the Syrian people feel about their army who's been protecting them from terrorists. So, let's work on normalizing Syria and introducing people to Syria as a country and the Syrian people, because they should not be pariahs. You will be blessed if you have a Syrian friend.
What we found more and more is that if someone says, you're brutal, you're brutal, you're brutal, it's the person that's making that proclamation that then goes and executes fantastically brutal stuff. And you can only be accountable for your own actions. And our nation has become a very brutal nation. So just take that with some sobriety.
And let's break bread together. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening and night or day, whatever's ahead of you. Thank you so much for joining. Again, we love you and thank you for spending this time with us. Good night.
Good night.